This is the Dan Mandis Show, Super Talk 99.7.
2:05 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN, Dan Mandis Show. Well, unfortunately, one of the topics that we have to cover often is terrorism, and right now we do have the hunt going on right now for that terror suspect in Turkey. And one of the things that I'm going to ask you, Dr. Alex Del Carmen, terrorism expert, is why is it the authorities in Turkey, they're not naming who the suspect is? They're not giving a name.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Always good to see you and hear you.
Yes.
In reference to your question, I think that it has to do a great deal with exactly what they don't know at this point. And I hate to say it, but it sounds like they don't really have a good grasp on exactly who was the culprit behind it. They have suspects, but they don't really know exactly what or who or how many people were involved in this particular type of attack.
Well, one of the things that I've read is that the wife of this particular suspect says that they had absolutely no idea. She had no idea that he was a radical Islamic terrorist. So they must have somebody in mind if they're talking to his wife. Do you believe when, and in your experience, because you are somebody who looks at these things every day, and do you believe when family members say, oh, we had no idea? Do you believe them?
You know, it's extremely hard to believe that she wouldn't have, I mean, you know, people have different types of relationships with their spouses, right? So we always assume that there's a level of intimacy where a spouse would know everything that a husband would do. You know, in this case, I find it extremely hard to believe that she would not know or have known that this man had any kind of links to ISIS or be able to perhaps even plan an attack of this magnitude. Having said that, you know, that's one of the people that they suspect. That's not necessarily the person that they're after. And so it's hard to say at this point whether or not this person is the main suspect, someone that assisted in the attack, or someone that they're asking questions on that may lead them to those that assisted in the attack. So it's really difficult to be able to determine exactly what this person's level of involvement may be.
And that's a great point. I mean, we're talking about multiple arrests. So far, about 20 to be exact. Now, that's a lot and scary, obviously, given that they seem to have found a hive of terror, if you will. Let's talk about the investigation thus far. What does it tell us about the war on terror, generally speaking? We're talking about, I believe, is it one person that carried out this attack, but they've arrested 20 others. And so it looks like this guy clearly, as much as we can tell right now, had one heck of a support system.
Absolutely, and they all do. I mean, every time that we have one of these attacks, and we always focus on one person, and the public and law enforcement begin to try to track that one individual down, and that person may end up dead or arrested. But at the same time, typically there's a network of individuals that supports this type of activity. So it's not unusual, believe it or not, that they would have 20 to 30 people in custody. Having said that, not everyone that is arrested is necessarily the person involved in these attacks, and not everybody that hasn't been arrested hasn't been involved. So at the same time, you know, we like to say that there's typically a village that goes behind that terrorist, that supports a terrorist to be able to do what he or she will do.
So New Year's Eve, last time you and I spoke, I believe it was a day or two before New Year's Eve, and we were talking about whether or not you were worried about attacks on New Year's Eve. And just for the record, of course, we're all worried about those attacks on New Year's Eve. We saw nothing. One, were you surprised that we did not see any attacks here in America and across the world on New Year's Eve, with the exception of what happened in Turkey?
You know, like I told you on the show, I thought, you know, back then, as I still think today, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, we worry about this stuff every single day. Just because I'm worried about it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. But I will tell you that we also don't know what is going to happen, what perhaps challenges they had to carry out an attack on New Year's that they may be planning to do in the next 30 to 60 days. And so, you know, I think that we got lucky, and I think that we were able to probably curtail some of these attacks throughout the world. But as we also forecasted in your show, you know, and which sadly happened in Turkey, you know, attacks, you know, followed or were close to this event, which sadly ended up in the death of multiple people in this case.
I think there's something to be said for the fact that there is so much security on evenings like New Year's Eve. And I always laugh because I always read these stories of, oh, the security's ramped up for New Year's Eve. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be something horrible, God help us, that happens at a high school football game in, you know, Indiana or something like that on a Friday night. In other words, I think that as much as you can ramp up security when you can, I think that where there is a will, there's a way.
That's exactly right. And what I always worry about is soft targets.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at how all of these attacks are taking place, and you know, folks talk to me about the Super Bowl. They talk to me about, for instance, the inauguration of our new president coming up. They talk to me about New Year's, and my response to them is those events are probably the most secure events, you know, up to now. In other words, if you were to attend or be part of these events, even though no one guarantees safety 100% of the way, but you know, you're probably going to be safe because there are so many multiple layers of the law enforcement entities coming in to secure that facility that it's going to be really hard for bad guys to do something at that particular event. Having said that, what I worry about is when those events are over and the everyday lives of Americans takes place, which is supermarkets, daycare centers, and various other facilities that don't enjoy that level of security on a daily basis.
Angela Merkel has finally said that radical Islamic terrorism is one of the major issues. As a matter of fact, I think she said the major issue in Germany right now. I've talked often enough about the refugees and migrant flow that have been heading into Germany over the past couple of years. It's finally, she's acknowledged this, but it's too late, I would think. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, finally, as you indicated, she acknowledged what is obvious to the rest of the world, and unfortunately, this is all about politics. You know, she knows that she's facing a lot of criticism, historically speaking, about the things that she's been doing for the past years, and so she came out and basically said, oh, by the way, this is Islamic terrorism. Well, you know, too little, too late. And at this point, what really matters is what her actions are going to be following those political statements. Are things going to change regarding immigration in Germany? Is she going to be able to do something politically and law enforcement based to give the law enforcement community the tools to be able to prevent these attacks from taking place?
Right. I think you could shut off Germany right now, but that doesn't solve the problem of radical Islamic terrorism because they've had, over 1 million, right? People come into Germany, and they have really no idea who is in their country, what they're up to. They've lost a lot of these folks as well. So let's just say that Germany has its issues cut out for them. Now, here in America, we're in 2017 now. Biggest terror threat, homegrown terror or imported terrorism?
I think both, and I would argue that the sympathizers of ISIS, individuals that are actually enamored with the idea of harming our United States in the homeland, perhaps connecting to ISIS via the internet. The FBI director has told us that every single state in the United States has the sympathizers that the FBI is currently tracking. What worries me right now is these folks that are clearly individuals that do not enjoy and do not like the freedoms that we have in place, that are going to undermine our country in the coming months, the coming years, by sympathizing with ISIS and going out there and committing a soft target type of terrorist attack.
Now, you just mentioned something that jogged my memory on one of the questions that I was going to ask you. I read this in Bloomberg related to the war on terror, and I'm going to ask your perspective on it. And it's kind of long, so you're going to have to deal with it. But here's what it says. And again, this is in Bloomberg, and it talks about the war on terror. When it comes to understanding the aims of the enemy, President Obama makes the same mistake as his predecessor, George W. Bush. Obama says the whole objective of these terrorists is to scare us into changing the nature of who we are and our democracy. This is the president's version of George W. Bush's "they hate us for our freedoms." That story in Bloomberg continues on and talks about what this person thinks is the truth about why there is radical Islamic terrorism. He says the truth is that these jihadists do not hate us just because of our freedom. Their objective is not to provoke an overreaction where America ceases to be a democracy. The guy says it's much more straightforward. These groups want to force the non-Muslim world to submit to Islamic rule. Jihadists seek a conquest. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, the jihadists are not true Muslims, and so I would find that hard to believe that they would want to promote Islam when they themselves don't follow any kind of Islamic condition or belief. At the same time, what I do believe, however, is that they do hate us for our freedom. They do hate us for what we stand for. If you read the letter that Osama bin Laden wrote to America back in the day after 9/11, I mean, clearly in that letter he begins to delineate all of the things that he hates about our way of being, who we are, how we live our lives, how women enjoy the freedoms that they do. In his own twisted mind, he essentially modified all those things and condemned them as being evil. But you have to understand that at the end of the day, what they want is they want an overthrow of our government, of our way of life, so that they themselves can reign over the United States, but they don't have the capacity, capability, historically or any other way, to take over our country. So they'll never come in and invade our country and have thousands of jihadists, come in through our border to inflict terror in every single city of the United States. They just don't have that capacity. So what they are going to do is very slowly, very meticulously inflict that terror in cities, in towns, in every which way, so that they can remind us that A, they exist, and B, they matter, and 3, that they want to change our way of life. There is no question that that is what they want. So I would disagree with the article.
Donald Trump takes office on January 20th. If you could tell Donald Trump your recommendations, top 3, to fight radical Islamic terrorism moving forward, what would they be?
Well, the first one is to set the tone. I think it's incredibly important as a new president that he sets the tone before the entire world that we are not going to take their insults, we're not going to take their threats, and we're certainly not going to take their attacks. That if they attack us, we're going to attack them back 10 times with the force that they used against our citizens, either domestically or overseas. Number 2, I would work with our partners throughout the world in a serious way, not just giving political jargon back and forth about the things that we want to do together, but really militarily strategizing with Israel, with various other countries throughout the world to fight these jihadists. And number 3, I would cut them where it hurts them, which is I would cut them financially from having this displacement of money that Iran and various other countries seem to be continuing to funnel to these terrorists across the world in order to harm the United States. I think those 3 true components, if the president is committed to fighting terrorism and he does those 3 things, I think we're going to see a massive reduction in their capability in the next year.
Dr. Alex Del Carmen, terror expert, thank you very much, and you have a fantastic afternoon. It is 12:17.